If you are ever prosecuted or sued in Germany, the one thing that you will not get is a trial by jury, which, if you're from a country that considers trial by jury to be a basic and fundamental human right, is unthinkable. But as it turns out, the list of countries that have jury trials is quite short, and in many of those countries, juries are only used in some trials, not all of them. To be sure, there are advantages of a jury system, but there are also disadvantages. I am going to be talking about some of the disadvantages, but I don't personally think that one system is necessarily better than any other. They're just different ways of getting justice done. But before we move on to that, let me just briefly explain the history. Because while there are no jury trials in Germany now, there used to be. But this is going back to the 19th and the first half of the 20th centuries, and initially, not everywhere in Germany. The 19th century began very badly for the German-speaking lands, with the collapse of the Holy Roman Empire, leading to France taking over some of its former territories. And in those territories, the French occupiers introduced jury trials, or, as they called them, assizes. And they seemed to work quite well because the March Revolution of 1848 resulted, among other things, in the introduction of assizes to some other regions of Germany as well. In fact, the new constitution that was being drawn up was intended to mandate jury trials for the most serious crimes and for all political crimes. That never came to pass though, because the revolution failed. But there were still jury trials in some regions, and the concept had a lot of supporters. And then in 1871, the German Empire was founded as a modern nation-state, finally bringing the German-speaking lands up to date with the rest of Europe. And in 1879, a law was passed introducing jury trials at the provincial court level for the more serious crimes, things like murder, arson, and perjury. Jury trials had a panel of 3 judges and a jury of 12 people. The jury would decide whether the defendant was guilty or not guilty, and in the event of a guilty verdict, the judges would decide on an appropriate sentence. That sounds very similar to the systems in the US and Britain, but very soon, some of its flaws started to become apparent. And one of those flaws was the cost. Jurors are ordinary members of the public picked at random. That's the whole point. But if you forced somebody to sit in a courtroom for a couple of days, that person couldn't work for the duration of the trial. And if they couldn't work, they would lose income. So they had to be compensated for that. But it gets worse, because the 12 jurors had to be selected from a wider pool of 30 people, which meant that for every jury trial, 30 people had to be summoned to go through the jury selection process, and all 30 had to be compensated for loss of earnings. There were other issues. Juries didn't have to explain how they reached their verdicts, which meant that a defendant who had been found guilty couldn't easily appeal on the grounds of a misapplication of the law. It was not possible to prove that a jury had made some kind of procedural error. Also, even if the laws themselves can be very simple, you don't need a law degree to understand that deliberately killing somebody is illegal unless it was in self-defense. Individual cases can be extremely complicated, and sometimes jurors would struggle to understand exactly how the law applied. I don't know about you, but I've often heard of some high-profile case that had me scratching my head, and I had to watch a 40-minute video by Legal Eagle just to understand exactly what happened. I definitely would not want to be on a jury. And then there's jury nullification, which is when a jury believes that the defendant broke the law, but acquits them anyway because they disagree with the law. That's usually praised as a good thing because it is a way for ordinary people to strike down very obviously dumb laws. It is not such a good thing, though, when it can be used to allow people to literally get away with murder. This sometimes happened in the US, particularly in the South, back when racial segregation was still very much a thing. White defendants accused of killing a black person were sometimes acquitted by all-white juries, even when the case seemed to be completely obvious. And this kind of thing, by the way, is the reason jury selection is so important. But in the 1920s, Justice Minister Erich Emminger made some sweeping changes to the system. He didn't want to abolish juries, he just believed that juries were being used in completely the wrong way. He believed that untrained members of the public were probably not the best people to decide on a verdict, but he did think that they could be a huge benefit when it came to deciding on a sentence, something that juries traditionally have no role in at all. He reduced the number of jurors from 12 to just 6, which obviously saved costs, and then he also changed the seating arrangement so that jurors sat with the judges. This meant that now judges and jurors took their decisions together on an equal footing. Of course, then came the Nazi regime, followed by the Second World War, which left Germany in smoking ruins. So the entire justice system had to essentially be re-established. And jury trials, as I said at the beginning of this video, no longer exist in Germany, but we can still see their influence. Emminger's version of a jury sitting with the judges has been altered into a bench trial with professional judges and lay judges. These lay judges are basically ordinary people, just as jurors are, but their selection is quite different. Every 5 years, citizens can nominate either themselves or somebody else to be put on a list of candidates, which is then put to the local municipal council. The council then votes on each name in turn, and every name that gets at least 2/3 of the votes can go forward. The list is then made available to the public for a week, during which time anyone can register any objections they have to any of the candidates. Then the list, together with any objections, is forwarded to the local court, where a committee consisting of 1 judge, 1 administration official, and 7 other people elect from that list a number of lay judges and reserve lay judges. These lay judges then serve for 5 calendar years. They provide the same kind of counterbalance that a classic jury does, but they also benefit from working closely together with professional judges. And of course, they gain experience throughout their terms of office. This avoids the problem of jurors not understanding the assignment and also eliminates the need for a tedious jury selection process. As I said earlier, I am not saying that juries are bad, but this system is an attempt to get a compromise that avoids some of the problems with juries while still allowing ordinary people to participate in the administration of justice. How well this works in practice, I'm not really qualified to talk about. But what all of this means is that in Germany, you will not get a jury trial. It will be a bench trial. Depending on the crime that you're accused of and which type of court is hearing your case, you may be heard by a single judge or by a panel that will probably include lay judges. At the provincial court level, serious crimes such as murder are tried in front of a panel of 3 professional judges and 2 lay judges, which is a far cry from an actual jury trial, but that is how it evolved. In fact, this specific type of court setup is still called Schwurgericht, even though there is no jury. There is, though, a coda to this story, because there was in fact a jury trial in Berlin as late as 1979. It was a particularly difficult case involving the hijacking of a Polish aircraft, and it fell to the American occupying forces to put the hijackers on trial. And they did so according to US law, which meant that the defendants had a constitutional right to trial by jury. This was a unique event, though. It had never happened before, and since the US no longer occupies Germany, it will never happen again. So, no jury duty for me. Yay! Oh, that reminds me, a couple of years ago I made a video about that hijacking, which I've linked to down there. Thank you for watching.